Hello and welcome to a special edition of Author's Airwaves, where books come alive. This evening I have with me Ernest Dempsey, author of The Blue Fairy and Other Tales of Transcendence. Well, good evening, Ernest, and thanks for being on our show. I'm going to ask you a few questions about your latest book. Listeners can find out more about Ernest at his website, www.ernestdempsey.com. Ernest, your recently published storybook, The Blue Fairy and Other Tales of Transcendence, is about death, something that may not sound so agreeable a subject to many readers. Why would you write about death?
You see, to most of us, both instinctively and socially, death remains the D word. It is the dreaded word or thought, which many of us tend to avoid on both conscious and unconscious levels. But what scares me more is not to talk of it, to skip it and shut it out of our lives, despite the fact that we all have to cross this point, sometimes even reach there and return to life, like in near-death experiences. And why? If dying is inevitable, why must we not bring it up as a reality to explore through discussion and thinking? The best way, in my view, to erase a fear is to explore it thoroughly, and that is what my book, The Blue Fairy and Other Tales of Transcendence, attempts to start in the world of contemporary writing. Through stories about death, I mean to document a case for integrating the concept of death as a meaningful part of our lives, as a phenomenon that gives meanings to our lives, and most importantly, as a means of reinforcing and reshuffling our relationships with ourselves and with other people, things and places even, which make part of our living experience.
Ernest, you've dedicated this book to your late aunt. What did her death mean to you, personally?
The death of my aunt Farhana was the first death of a very close relative to whom we were emotionally attached, and that was the point in my life when I realized that death meant more than just the disappearance of a person for good. That incident was a dividing line between hearing about death and actually feeling what death means to a survivor. So nearly 17 years after her death, my aunt still lives in my memories and visits me in dreams, with her smiling and affectionate face looking at me and assuring me that she is okay. So her disappearance still has an important meaning for my life, which is that true respect and heartfelt affection don't die with physical death, but these positive feelings go on and even keep us going.
So what is the message about death in your book?
My stories vary in the angle they take at death and its impact on life. So I would say there is no single message that represents all that I wrote in there. And I would rather not generalize in just a few lines what I felt and expressed in several months of my work. But it will be safe to say that this collection of stories attempts to take a close look at the phenomenon of death and kind of strips the word death of the feelings of fear and anxiety that are so inevitably associated with it in our usual way of thinking. The book is an attempt at showing that there is more to death than we know, and we need to discover on our own what any instance of death means to us.
Is it true that many of these stories are based on real-life happenings?
Certainly. Several stories are based on real-life incidents of death and dying in my family and friends. Cry of Pain, Dimmer, Mother Mary, Old Enemy, Obliate, The Blue Fairy, of course, The Child and the Dead. These are all fictionalized accounts of real-life events. In other stories, those which are mainly fictional, a particular situation sometimes represents a real-life incident. For example, in the story The Shake-Up, the little boy's foolhardy act of running a staple through his finger happened in real life while I was tutoring a hyperactive third grader, and out of his curiosity that child pressed the stapler on his finger and made it bleed. But some stories are 100% fictional, purely the product of imagination.
Has reading about death in great literary works also been an inspiration to you?
Well, yes, absolutely. Death has been the key element of a great plot in fiction, including short fiction, as far as I have read the celebrated works of literature, including many contemporary works. We see it almost all the time in pop fiction, but also in realistic and serious literary works, death continues to be the central motif, and my book is no exception here. As for inspiration, the best that I remember of death or dying in fiction is Tolstoy's War and Peace, where Prince Andrew has a most peaceful experience of dying. That scene, you see, while I was reading it, practically made me feel good about dying. um, and it was then that I knew what a great writer does to your decades of ingrained fear and anxieties. After that reading, though, the thought of death or dying stopped to be a horror to me. It was not a horror anymore. But of course, other memorable death scenes also inspired me at different times, including Lady Bart's death in Edith Wharton's The House of Mirth, no matter how bleak it was, and the death of Alvina Hoofton's father in The Lost Girl by D.H. Lawrence, and Vera's suicide in Oscar Wilde's The Nihilists, plus many more.
I hear you're writing your first novel. Is death an important element of your novel, too?
Wow. That's an interesting question and can be answered as both yes and no. Uh, and that is because I really am writing about a kind of situation in the life of my protagonists where they are struggling to come out of their lifeless lives. So death is a more symbolic element in my novel than it has been in The Blue Fairy and other tales of transcendence. And that takes us again to the point that death has many forms and meanings, most of which need to be discovered at least in the literary realm.
Thank you, Ernest, and we wish you luck with your up-and-coming writing. Thank you for your time and this opportunity again.
Thank you too for your time and this opportunity. Thanks.
Our listeners can learn more about Ernest at his website, www.ernestdempsey.com. Be sure to tune in to all our podcasts at www.authorsairwaves.com. For Authors Airwaves, this is Victor Volkman, wishing you all a good evening.